Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of TechieNet Tech, where we talk about technology that powers and supports education. Today we have with us a very special and interesting guest. This guest has studied philosophy, has taught psychology. Both of these are my favorite things. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Matt Bateman from Higher Ground Education. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Matt. Matt will go into details about what you do, but would love to hear a bit about yourself and Higher Ground Education. Would you like to talk to audience about what you do at Higher Ground Education, what Higher Ground Education does?
Yeah, sure. I am an educator. I'm a philosopher. I actually have a PhD in philosophy and was a psychology professor for a little while. And I've always been very, very interested in education. Even at the college level, like I love teaching. I love teaching undergraduates. I love teaching 18-year-olds. It's kind of still my sweet spot for teaching, even though I've taught much younger and much older students. Um, and Partly because of I was looking for a career change for various reasons, and partly because I've always been interested in education. About 10 years ago, 8 or 10 years ago, I got sucked into the world of Montessori education. Some people that I know introduced me to it, gave me a wonderful tour of and a chance to observe a series of Montessori classrooms. And I was completely blown away with it. I've worked quite a bit in preschool settings as well as higher education. I did a lot of that in college and earlier in my life. And the kind of concentration and joy and seriousness and benevolence that you see in a Montessori classroom is it was new to me. It was like all the best elements of my childhood, all my best memories were all present in this fairly structured environment, and children were doing the kinds of things that I certainly want to see children doing. I think that many people want to see children doing, where they're really, really engaged, joyously engaged in serious work, and they were choosing it. It wasn't because there was a teacher lording over them and giving them assignments and cheerleading them. It was because of the way the environment was set up, and because of the way the culture of the classroom was set up, and because of the way the curriculum was set up. And I mean, I didn't even understand all of this at the time when I first saw a Montessori classroom. It was something that I loved. I fell in love with it very quickly, and that I knew I wanted to understand. And I'm trained as a philosopher and as an intellectual historian. So my way of understanding things is like, I am going to talk to a million people and engage in debates and read all of Montessori's works and her letters and her epistolary and her critics. And I've been doing that for the last 10 years, really. And I'm still doing that. And some of the people that I was talking to when I was first getting into it, we really aligned around what makes Montessori unique. That it's this. I mean, there's this question as to like, okay, like Montessori's clearly getting a lot right. She has her own description of what's going on, but how are we to understand what's driving the good things in a Montessori classroom? And my view and the view of my collaborators and colleagues was that um, there are some really deep solutions in Montessori to really perennial problems in education. Things like, how can you have both rigorous conceptual knowledge oriented learning where the child is getting the things that are the foundations of knowledge that are really important to any kind of cognitive frame and to any kind of connection with reality, and that we expect schools to give you things like literacy in mathematics and the kind of disciplinary subjects, history, literature, science. How do we get those to children in a way that is wholly compatible with and doesn't at all compromise on the fact that learning is something that you choose to do, that it's a consensual and active process, that the child's interests and the child's choices are at the center of a healthy learning process. And this is a problem that all educators face. Like, I mean, I face this as a university educator. Um, and that typically you see people try to achieve some sort of balance or also like back and forth. And Montessori just solves this issue in early childhood. It's like she figured out a way that we can have our cake and eat it too. And once I had identified that, and the people that I was working with had identified that, like it was like, this is it. Like this is this kind of pattern of solution is what we wanted to do with our lives. We think it is like a really deep solution to the problems in education. And that's what higher ground education is about. So we founded Higher Ground on the premise of taking this Montessori approach, this very specific and new kind of structure that's coupled with this reverence for the child's choice and agency and capacity for self-direction, and really just building it out at scale, building it out at other ages. So pushing Montessori into the older ages, doing things to, so we have 100 schools now. It's taken us 6 years to get there, but now we're growing pretty quickly. Also thinking about just modern ways that we can use technology, which I think we'll talk about today, in order to kind of push the boundaries on this kind of education. So, Higher Ground, it's a Montessori startup. It's a Montessori organization. We do everything from, we run physical schools, we have virtual schools, we have teacher training, and the main thing that I do is run a think tank. So Higher Ground has a think tank arm called Montessorium. So Montessori and then um at the end. We've kind of given it a Latin suffix. That's about talking about some of these philosophical, psychological, controversial issues in education and just figuring out the truth there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt. I think that was very, very helpful. Just so you know, I have a 3.5 year old now, and he's in daycare, and there are these conversations that we are having at home. My wife has been telling me about Montessori, and how what are the things that she's been seeing. So I think when you spoke about how Montessori education, what are the things, what are the elements involved, I can relate to some of the things that she was talking to me about because she has been visiting some of those. So yeah, thank you so much. So you are the VP of pedagogy at Higher Ground Education. How does your background in philosophy and psychology, assuming some of child psychology, help you in that? And what are the things that become a part of your role at Higher Ground Education?
Yeah, I have this kind of interdisciplinary background in philosophy and psychology where I studied the history of philosophy pretty extensively. I went to a program that my graduate program at UPenn was kind of known for, and just excellent at the history of ideas in particular. But I also did a lot of work. I kind of switched focuses in the middle of my graduate program to be a little bit more about cognitive science and the empirical sciences, and I was interested in philosophical questions that arose there. I talked my way into a Cogneuro lab, and ended up writing a dissertation on philosophical issues in the methodology of cognitive neuroscience, and that's a standing interest of mine too. So again, going back to college and even before college, I was always interested in psychology, and particularly alternative approaches to psychology, like ecological psychology, embodied cognition. I don't even remember. I was trying to figure out the other day how I first got introduced to those ideas. And it's like so much a part of my interests that I've actually lost the particular episodic memories where I first discovered them. But the philosophy and psychology come up all the time in education, all the time. Particularly philosophy, and this might be surprising to hear. I think when people think about kind of education as like a research field, or the kinds of advances in the special sciences that we would want to be able to push forward education, they often think of empirical research, psychological research, cognitive science research, and that's true. I do think that those areas can help, but education is about, how I define education. It's the systematic support for human development. So it encompasses parenting, it encompasses schooling, and there's no way to do that if you have a young child. So I have a 2-year old. You have a 3-year old. If you have a young child, absolutely part of what you have to be thinking about as a parent is, what kind of person am I helping them to grow up to be? And
Yeah,
not in a specific way where it's like I'm helping them to grow up to be a doctor or a lawyer. Actually, I mean, some parents do think that way. I think that that's generally a mistake. But what are the components of the good life? Like, do you need to be hardworking, and why? And why is work important? And like, what is the role of human relationships in life? And like, what am I shooting for? Like, what is the good life that I'm trying to help this child grow up into? Even given that I don't know a million of the details. Like, obviously, every child is unique and every life is unique, but there is this science, there is this branch of inquiry of philosophy called ethics that is concerned with questions about what the good life is and what the right way to live is. And you can raise analogous issues for knowledge. So even if you just focus on the learning parts of education, what does it mean for a child to learn the things that they need to know to get these foundations of knowledge that we treasure, that I think we rightly treasure? Well, what is knowledge? And what is the knowledge acquisition process? Again, there's a branch of philosophy that deals with these questions. It's called epistemology, and it's not particularly developmental in nature, but it is super, super relevant. And there is massive unclarity in the field about these issues. I think most of the time when people are confused about education, it's because they don't know what it's for, they don't know what they're shooting at, and they don't really know what understanding or knowledge are, and so they kind of paper over it with talk about foundations or academics without having a clear sense of what they're shooting for. And philosophy is really helpful in assessing that problem and in building up a kind of alternative solutions. Like, it's really helpful to just be able to ask those questions and go to first principles and get the right kind of confusion to let you propel yourself forward and figure out some of these solutions, get clarity on what the purpose of education is, get clarity on what you're doing. In terms of
Thanks.
psychology, should I go about psychology, or do you want to ask me another question?
No, no, please go ahead. No, please go ahead. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, in psychology, Montessori was a developmental psychologist, and I think that that's key. Like, you can't understand her approach without understanding her view of the stages of development and her view of how learning is motivated and how the mind works and how the subconscious and conscious kind of interact in development. Um, I would say, and so that's important, and being able to assess and understand that is important. And that's a big part of why I've done a deep dive into Montessori, is to understand her psychology, not Montessori psychology, but her psychological theories. Though I feel like I've also done a deep dive into her personal psychology. I've just read so many of her biographies at this point. But I mean, how it often comes up in practice is that many well-motivated, intelligent people really want education to be a research problem. Like if you, I mean,
Right.
if you talk to a parent or an investor, like they'll be like, what does the research say? Like, like, oh, I'm like thinking about Montessori versus Waldorf versus like some sort of neoclassical education. Like, what does the research say about what's best? Or even take a particular topic like homework, or should I give my child stickers and during toilet training or something like that? What does the research say? And most, I think most education research is pretty limited in what it can tell us, and that I think it takes some expertise to be able to see that and to be able to understand that, and to not be. I mean, there's a negative or critical or skeptical project that's worth, if you're going to be a serious educator, that's worth kind of having at least as a hobby project, which is really being able to differentiate between good research and bad research in education, or just even interesting and informative research and kind of research that's more kind of normal science or limited in scope, where that doesn't actually tell us that much. And unfortunately, just because of the way that, and this is way beyond education, this is just the way that the social sciences have evolved over the last 50 years. There's just a lot of bad stuff out there that doesn't get as much mileage, that doesn't replicate. And if you have the right kind of training and lens, it's not that hard to kind of sniff it out. But if you don't, it's really easy to be misled. And so, just in my day to day, that's the most often how it comes up. Though in the background, there's all these. I have a pretty substantive conception of what the human being is like, what the human mind is like, psychologically and biologically, that come from Montessori and other thinkers like Gibson and Bernstein and some of these embodied cognition thinkers, that really informs my view of children, and that's really important too.
Yeah, and you mentioned about research, right? I think one of the other things that I find with research is it also kind of, you have a tendency to have confirmation bias. If your mind thinks in a certain way, you will find some research that supports that view. So I think that point, some of that research is important, but sometimes it can also have those kind of connotations to it.
Yeah, I mean, what you see, I mean, so what happens is that, in fact, most of what we want to learn in education is not a matter of cognitive science research. Some of it
Correct.
is, some of it definitely is, but science has a certain kind of imprimatur, and people trust science, and science is a known way of discovering things. And so what you see is people who are really asking, what they want is philosophical clarity about education. Um, and they turn to the research, which isn't equipped to give them that philosophical clarity, and then they kind of undergo a process of like, well motivated but still not great rationalization and confirmation bias, where they kind of find research findings that presuppose that kind of confirm their philosophical commitments about whatever their most strong. Maybe they're conflicted, but whatever your strongest philosophical commitment is about education, or maybe it makes them waffle. Yeah, it's. This is an area where when you're not sure, when you, in absence of good ways to get answers to questions, confirmation bias becomes a lot more powerful because it's not actually clear from the research like what would confirm or disconfirm something like Montessori versus traditional education. That's very hard to get traction on.
Right. So, thank you for providing that. I think that was very helpful. One of the things that, what is very interesting to me is how you blend this approach or this pedagogical thought with technology and deliver with higher ground education. Would love to understand your modes of delivery in terms of, how does this come into practice? What to teach? What do students see? How do you use technology to leverage and bring it at some scale?
Yeah, so I'm gonna give you a mix of what we're doing and what we want to do, and just try to present an overall vision. And
Perfect.
you can
Yeah.
feel free to interrupt me at any time and ask me to clarify or more details, because there's a lot to say on this topic. So we are very pro technology as an organization, and Montessori starts young. So Montessori starts at 3 months old, and so there are real questions about what that means. Like, why are we so pro technology? How can we use it to help? And it does look different. It looks different at different ages. Like, I don't really think that technology, like that children in an infant program should be doing anything with screens. But that doesn't mean that technology doesn't play a role. Just as a kind of framing point in terms of our overall approach and philosophical framework, I mentioned earlier how Montessori solved some of these perennial problems in education between, how do you get the child to learn the things that it's good for the child to learn objectively, with reconciling that with the child's choice and motivation and the fact that learning and growth are voluntary. And it seems like there's a kind of tension or trade-off between those two things. And Montessori's core to Montessori's solution is you design an environment. You design an environment that's very, very intentional and engineered. I even like using the word synthetic to describe the Montessori environment, where it's full of materials that have been created and engineered to to be accessible to the child, to be open to the child's choice and exploration. And in the child's choosing these materials and working with them and making choices and exploring them, they get the foundations of knowledge that they need. So these are very, very good learning materials, like unreasonably effective learning materials, that are sequenced in a certain way, that are introduced in a certain way by the teacher in brief presentations, that the child practices with in a certain way, and that's really joyful and delightful to the child, so that it is driven by the child's interests and consent and activity, and the child is practicing with these materials, but they're practicing with the materials, and the materials have a lot of kind of content and material built into them that is just exceptionally good for seeding knowledge, and for giving a conceptual foundation. So what does any of that have to do with technology? Um, Technology. So what Montessori really worked out her approach for young children, especially the 3 to 6 age. That's where she spent the most time kind of refining the implementation practice. And the basic, there are kind of cultural things that you do in the classroom and things that the teacher does, but the basic kind of core mechanism is learning materials and physical environmental design. Our technology thesis, in essence, is that you can create a digital prepared environment that serves a similar function in many other contexts. So for older children, take a teenager, because that's an easy case. An elementary student, it's like somewhere in between a teenager and early childhood in terms of probably how much technology exposure you want them to be giving, how much you want them to be kind of engaging with physical materials. But take a teenager, and let's say that you think that it's really important that a teenager, like, these are things that are part of our history curriculum, that a teenager come to understand recent history as well as older history. In particular, the history of the 20th century that was dominated by the Cold War and Pax Americana and the horrors of the 20th century. So there's a lot of history content that you want them to learn, and there's a certain kind of chronological way that you think that they should end up holding it. But within that, there's tremendous options. There's options in the order that they do it. There's options in the kinds of assignments and activities that they get. There's options in like they could have like 3 weeks where they're not studying history at all, where they're studying mathematics instead. How is all of that organized? How do they interface with this kind of like you could imagine like a map or a skill tree, like I don't know how many of your audience members have like played role playing games where it's like you level up your characters and you spend your skills and you're kind of building a skill tree, but some skills are prerequisites for others. Like there's a lot of optionality in the skill tree, but there's still a structure to it. And exposing that structure to children. So in Children's House and for the young students, for the preschool students, that structure is exposed in the very physical design of the classroom. For older students, as knowledge gets more abstract, it's not that obvious how to design a physical environment to expose that increasingly complicated structure. And we think that the right kind of LMS, the right kind of learning environment, can be like a digital Montessori shelf, can kind of give the student really, really exciting and motivated content that they can see the structure of, that they can navigate through in their own way, but that's still opinionated and has the right kinds of constraints and guardrails to help the teenager in this case, get something help guarantee that the teenager gets something like mastery, like real knowledge and understanding. They're not just checking boxes when they're moving through this curricular content, and it's really motivating and engaging. They can choose it, and they can organize it, and they can relate it to other ideas. I think that's a very hard problem to solve without technology. And in fact, I mean, in kind of, maybe this is contingent, maybe this is just like who's been working on it, but in fact, the Montessori approach of the prepared environment at the level of curriculum has not really been extended into the older ages. And I think the part of the reason is just that it's just so insanely hard to have a systematic, 5-subject disciplinary curriculum that, like, I mean, high school students can learn anything. Like, high school students are like adults in a certain way cognitively, and in other ways they're not. But like, it's just very hard to organize that without software, and that's what we're looking for information technology to do. Now, that has other applications too. So we use information technology. We use that kind of ethos of like prepare a digital environment and then turn the learner loose. That's also really important to our teacher training, which is something that adults take. So people that are professionals and, anywhere between 18 years old and like 50 years old. I mean, people of all stripes have taken our teacher training, and teacher training is education. And so we use that process there. We use it to support the teachers. So in early childhood, like there's not like an iPad in our toddler classrooms, but there's an iPad for the teacher. And it's really, really valuable for the teacher to have a certain kind of systematic curricular support, record keeping support. And it's logistical, but it's logistical in a way that really touches on pedagogy, on what they're doing, on the kinds of lesson planning that they're doing, on how they're assessing, on how they're tracking students' developmental progress. It's a massive aid. I mean, if you want to really revolutionize education, you have to change teachers. I mean, that's one of the main bottlenecks, is you have to really empower teachers on a very different approach, and technology is invaluable in doing that. So that I have more thoughts on what we want to do and what we're aiming to do. So we bought a year and a half ago, we bought Altitude, AltSchool, the company formerly known as AltSchool, created an LMS called Altitude. We purchased it. We've been modifying it and adapting it for our uses ever since. And some of the changes that we're making are pretty deep and structural that kind of reflect our pedagogy. And that's an ongoing project. But, we're using it in all sorts of contexts in our adolescent programs and our virtual programs and our teacher training. And the goal is to get it to be what I just described, to get it to be this like premier, really thoughtfully pedagogically structured LMS that has this map-like or skill tree-like structure, such that you can give the people using it a tremendous amount of freedom.
Great. And you touched on multiple aspects there. I would like to go, I would like to understand a bit more. See, one of the problem or the dilemma a lot of early people in early education space face is the problem of screen time, right? How much screen time is important? Is screen time, like I mean, we are parents, right? We, like, when I have a TV on, I'll keep questioning myself, like, is this the right amount? And is it helping him learn? Because there are things about, okay, he's watching, let's say, a Zootopia, which he loves these days. He's watching Zootopia. It is helping him learn about some elements. So, how do you think at a very conceptual level about things like this, like at a basic root level on screen time and technology, and what is the balance? What exposure is good, what is not?
So I don't think that screen time is a legitimate concept. And part of the reason why I don't like to use it, and I don't think I'm sure that there are places that we use it at higher ground than our in our writing, but um, I don't think that having a FaceTime call with grandma and watching Carl Sagan's Cosmos documentary and playing Minecraft and playing Candy Crush and watching SpongeBob SquarePants and I don't think that all these things they're not. I mean, they all take place on screens, but they're not. They're too dissimilar to categorize together and say there is screen time. How do we think about this phenomenon of screen time? So I think that I mean this isn't this is just to kind of like get underneath the question. I think that the question gets at something really legitimate, which is I mean my daughter has this too. My daughter is 2 years old. We're pretty. I mean, compared to other parents that I know, we're pretty liberal with screen time with her. So she usually watches somewhere between 30 minutes and an hour and a half of TV a day. And the whole question is, what is she watching? Like how is she engaging when she's watching? Is she just kind of like leaning back on the couch and zoning out and waiting for the next kind of overstimulating YouTube video to come up and we're playing it on repeat and that's kind of what's doing? Or I mean that's what I'm nervous about. So I'm not nervous about her watching screens. I'm nervous about what she's doing when she watches screens, how she engages with it. And then in terms of especially in terms of younger children, but I think this is true across the spectrum of ages, even for adults. I mean, part of the question with interfacing with technology is just I mean time is a trade-off. So insofar as you're spending time on one thing, you're not spending time on another thing. And early childhood is a time, and schools in general are a context where we want to be very very thoughtful about okay, like if the child is doing X, that means ipso facto they're not doing Y. And even like really valuable, quote unquote screen time, even like really engaged, learning intensive, value dense screen time, like it trades off against like time running around outside and exploring outside. And children absolutely need that. Like they need the contact with the messy physical social world. They need to play, they need to explore. And there are cases that are unfortunately common of young children kind of getting so sucked into technological ways of spending their time that it starts to really cut into the minimum required time that they need in order to get those other things. And by the way, I think that that can happen with other media too. So there is absolutely such a thing as a child who is too bookish. Like they're like
Yeah.
if a child can like there's like a kind of like let's say elementary age child who if left to their own devices will do nothing but read Harry Potter all day and then do nothing but pick up whatever the Earthsea series are like they're super into fantasy and they would just do it all the time if they wanted to. And like part of what that child needs the adults around them to do is help motivate them to choose some of the other things that are really, really important for their development that aren't books. I mean, it sounds weird to say like this child is reading too much, but that can happen. And something similar is true of screens. Do you want me to say a little bit about how I think about screen time with my daughter?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if love to.
Yeah. Um, we the main thing that she watches are what I consider to be high quality movies, Disney movies, Pixar movies. Not just I mean, we're not limited to those two brands, The Land Before Time. There's other kinds of children's content that I think it's well produced, it's narratively rich and compelling. The characters are interesting enough and human enough and substantiated enough so that you're learning something by watching it. The aesthetic quality is good. The quality of the music, if there's music, is good. There's some emotional drama to it, so that they're really kind of engaging in an emotional arc as they go through it, and they're long. They're a little bit long and complicated, like an hour and a half movie. Like really following it is at the very edge of what a 2-year-old can do. My daughter just turned two a couple of months ago, so she's still pretty young for this, and we've done this for a while. And I watched them with her Not every time, but often. In 30-minute chunks or 90-minute chunks, we try to avoid skipping around. Like she might want to watch a particular scene. I'm like, it's coming. Like I try to build her patience, like get her into the narrative. I ask her questions about it. And she herself is really engaged in it. Even if I'm not there to ask her questions about it, she'll kind of like get up from her seat and describe what's happening and want to talk about it and want to understand. Like she'll ask, like, Daddy, what's happening? And we might pause and I might explain it to her. That following a 90-minute narrative in a Disney or Pixar movie is really good for her, I think. And there are other kinds of screen time that I think are good. So when she was younger, we watched a lot of. I curated her a little mini list of little mini YouTube playlist of videos like nature videos, where it was like 10-minute fixed camera shot, so the camera doesn't move at all. Um, and it's just and there's no narrator or anything, and you're just watching penguins in the wild. They're waddling around, they're interacting with one another, they're sliding down hills, they're kind of socializing, they're pushing one another, they're making noises, they're being their penguin self. And it's not fast cut. Like she has to choose where to direct her attention. There's a chance that she might get bored with it and walk away. If she wants to sustain her interest, that takes some effort. It's like 10 minutes or watching the same thing. It's kind of like the video equivalent of being at a zoo. And I did this for construction sites. There's these wonderful YouTube channels of like walks, especially in Japan. For some reason, this is big in Japan. Like Tokyo Walks is a good one, where it's like a guy who wears like a head mounted or chest mounted stable steady cam, and he just quietly walks through Tokyo, and that's it. That's the video, and you get to see what he sees. And she would just stare at them and be fascinated and ask questions about them. These are the kinds of things that build interest. They expose her to things. Like it's really good that if a child is interested in penguins, or even if they're not interested in penguins, even if you just show them penguins and then they're interested in them, there's no prior interest. We live in a time when they can see them. Do you know how crazy that is? And how unique
Yeah.
that is to the 21st century, where like you don't have to go to a zoo, you don't have to travel. It's not this rare thing. Like children can see everything in the universe. There's videos of it. They can see other cities. They can see people in different cultures. I like that I can expose her to that. And the only issue is like de-risking the kind of overstimulation factor. Like you don't want to put the child in a position where they can get a lot of entertainment and value by being passive. You want it to be active, and so the fundamental principle is like, how do you ensure that it's an active process and that it's some work for them? How do you kind of make it in the zone of their proximal development, or make it something that just doesn't have that kind of extra stimulating factor? So that's how I think about screen time with her. On the margins, we also like take lots of photos of her and show her those photos, and she's like pretty good at using our phones to like flip through with her thumb and find photos. She's been since she was 1 years old. She's been like manipulating our technology pretty expertly, and she'll like change settings, and we don't know how to change them back. And I also consider that to be a good thing. Like I want her to grow up in a world where she feels at home with digital technology. This is like part of her world. It's not something that the adults around her are cynical about, even if we set some boundaries around it. And it's value dense for her, and she loves it, and she's looking forward to interacting with it more. I think that's just a net positive. So that's a shotgun of things that I do with my own daughter.
No, that's very helpful. I love the answer. I mean, not just great parenting advice for me, but also there are a lot of principles in there that you spoke about that I think are very valuable, right? Like screen time, we keep harboring on the word screen time, but it's not the screen time, it's the type of content, the duration. There is so much that goes into that. That when you're designing that kind of technology for early learning, those are things that you need to keep in mind because it's not a clear cut like okay one thing one and done okay screen time of 1 hour is good or screen time of 1 hour and 1 minute is bad. There are no clear cut answers to that. So I think that was very helpful. So thank you so much. Coming to that question of technology, we spoke about what you're doing right now. Where do you envisage the future to be? How do you see the play between technology and pedagogy as you go forward in the next 5 years or 10 years from now?
So I think it's a really, really exciting time, especially on the 5 or 10 year horizon. I think, and then I think if you look at it at the 20 or 30 year horizon, it's even more exciting. And there are a lot of unknowns. So I'm just going to give you a couple of things that I think are really, really low hanging fruit. Um, that I think we could see more of now, and that I expect to see more of, and then maybe I'll list one or two things that are a little bit more speculative. So the lowest hanging fruit is, have you ever seen the video Powers of 10? Do you know what that is?
I may have, but I'm not sure if you don't
Okay,
mind
so
elaborating.
I'll just describe it for your audience members. So a lot of people like have seen this and remember it from like elementary school. Maybe it's of my generation, but I've talked to younger people who have seen it too. So it's old. It was produced in like the 70s or 80s, I think. It's like a short video. I think it's about 10 minutes. You can probably Google it, Powers of 10 on YouTube. So it starts by, I believe it starts by with a kind of overhead shot of somebody sitting outside on a picnic blanket, like it's a person who's having a picnic, and there's a narrator, and every few seconds it zooms out one power of 10. So it zooms out 10x, and then it zooms out 100x, and then it zooms out 1000x, and then it zooms out 10,000x. And it just keeps doing that at a steady rate. And so you go from kind of seeing this person, and there's a kind of square around the screen to give you a sense of scale. You go from seeing this person sitting on a picnic blanket to seeing like an overhead satellite shot, to seeing the whole country, to seeing the whole Earth, to seeing the Earth and the moon, to seeing the whole solar system, and so on and so forth. And then at the end, it kind of zooms all the way back in, and then it goes micro. So it zooms into the person, and into their cells, and into their DNA, and into their molecules, and into their atoms, like the same thing, 10x in the other direction. And what the narration is about, explaining to you like powers of 10, like what each power of 10 means, what each level of scale means, how an order of magnitude is this very specific thing that expands your mind and allows you to relate different levels of scale to one another. It's just a short bit of content that is so good. It is so good. Like, I mean, it is just eternally the best or among the very best introductions to the idea of powers of 10 or orders of magnitude. It gives it visually. The
I mean,
narration is really good.
just listening to you, I can imagine. So I'm
Yeah.
sure the video,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So I mean, and so just think of like, what is the best pedagogical, just video content that you've seen? So for some people it's Powers of 10. Other people remember like Carl Sagan's Cosmos, like this kind of old video series that was produced by Carl Sagan that is an introduction to different aspects of science, the natural world around us and how we scientifically study it. There should be, it's very rare to find educational content that's that good. Very, very rare. Why is that?
What was the one revealing thing for me, just on continuing on the same line, is
Yeah.
human anatomy.
Yeah.
When I saw the human anatomy the first time, and I saw kidneys were actually on the posterior side, not on the. It was kind of revealing to me. Okay, this is how it is. I mean, it was all in my head, but now that I saw that, just on the power of video. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean the power of video and the power of the right kind of video. So if you just Google like, I don't know, like the recent history of Russia, like a lot of people are interested in Russia right now, you'll find some videos that are pretty good. Like for sure, like you could find good content out there, and it's amazing that you can find good content out there if you're interested in it. Like it's like crazy that we live in a time in history where there's like the equivalent of 50,000 encyclopedia entries that you can find on the same topic, and some of them are pretty good. None of them are as good as Powers of 10. None of them are as good as Cosmos. And I mean, why there isn't like why there isn't like Powers of 10 level, Cosmos level, Game of Thrones level kind of production quality, investment, and thought put into like what are like there should be like amazing curricular content that are just, again, eternally the best or amongst the best ways of introducing really key ideas that everybody loves and that are motivating and that are memorable and that are structured the right way, that have the right narration and the right visuals. It's hard to get this content. I know, I've worked on some of this content. It's not that easy to do, but like there should be like 100x or 1000x or 10,000x more investment in this area than there is. I think that what's out there is in general like, somewhere between like a C or optimistically a B, and it's very hard to find A plus examples. And A plus examples are really, really valuable. Like you could base a whole curriculum around them. And it is, technology enables it. I mean, it's kind of dumb technology. Like you could do Powers of 10 in the 80s, but like it's easier now. It's better now. Like you could do more with computer animation. It's easier and cheaper to do it. The fact that you could put it on YouTube and make it searchable is relevant. Like there should just be way more amazing curricular content out there in mixed media digital format. And I think that and people just aren't working on it, to be honest. I mean, some people are, but like not at the level that I'm talking about it, where it's like, how do we create the eternal, like real ambition about it?
Yeah.
So that's one thing.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast on the use of meta in education, right? Now I know, it is, but can we, if we are learning Greek philosophy, or let's say we're learning Greek history, or we're learning Russian history for that matter, can we actually be in that place? Can we be, that And again, this is all right now. It's all, but you never know what happens
Yeah,
next.
I think AR and VR, I think, are definitely going to be really, really important to education over the next 20 or 30 years. There's a question as to kind of what the timetable is like. I'm a little bit more optimistic on the timetable, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was slower. And also kind of video game like structures where it's like, you're a traveler to, the you're a traveler to ancient Greece. Like, do you you have invitations to go to Sparta or Athens? Which one do you go to first? Who do you talk to? Like you could imagine a kind of like RPG structure for, in which a lot of this was embedded that people really loved and that people use and explored and kind of were excited about and that helped motivate choices and so on. I'm bullish on that sort of thing as well. I don't think there are that many good examples of it out there to point to, but yeah, like choices, video game like structures for content. What Synthesis is doing is interesting. If you guys haven't heard of them, I think probably listeners to your podcast will have, but they're worth looking up in terms of creating, kind of embedding real lessons in a video game, collaborative video game like structure. AR and VR, like the idea that you could go out into the world and like turn on and off labels for things. For some people it sounds dystopian. To me, it sounds like amazing. Like I think that it could be like a 10x, 100x multiplier on every child is kind of like a budding naturalist, and the idea that you could foster that with something like a smart contact lens is like really, really game changing to making developmentally accessible a certain kind of conceptual attitude and interested and motivated attitude towards the natural world. So
yeah, and for audience, we'll definitely put link to the tens power of tens video that you spoke about, the Cosmos video, so that they can take a look at that. But no, I think that's you're right about how can we get that kind of content like that really, really good. And it's not just good content visually; it's also good pedagogically thought through kind of content to education. I think that is going to be very crucial, in my opinion, as well.
yeah, yeah. And I think I think there's no obstacles to just like, I mean, I'm hopeful that like we'll be able to do a lot of that, or that like, somebody like Disney or Netflix will get clued into this, and like, one of these streaming platforms will be like, wait a second, like why aren't we the go-to platform for like content-oriented curriculum? And start to think about that, and then it starts to get, starts to attract the best mind and get billions of dollars of investment, and because it's possible now. There's no limitation on doing it now, other than just nobody's doing it.
Great. Matt, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much. Anything that you would like to add as we wrap up this conversation? We've spoken about multiple issues, multiple areas. Anything that you would like to add or summarize this with?
Yeah, a couple of things. So, and this is I'm just going to shill what we do. So we do run virtual school programs. So we are very thoughtful about how technology interacts with the physical world. So if you have, especially if you have an elementary student or an adolescent at home and you want our virtual programs, go to guidepostmontessori.com and check out our virtual school programs. For middle school and high school, it's thoughtandindustry.com. And then for this kind of thing, we have, I mean, our think tank does do work on thinking about technology. So you can head to montessorium.com to read more there, or just follow me on Twitter. I'm always blasting out opinions at mbateman. So yeah, check us out.
Yep, and we'll post all the links in the show notes. So Matt, thank you so much for joining. It has been an absolute pleasure to host you. And let's hope that we see more Power of Tens videos coming in the coming future.
Yeah, and if you're interested in doing this kind of thing, definitely reach out to me on Twitter or whatever. So thanks.
Absolutely, will do. Thanks, Matt. Have a good one.
Thank you. Yep. Bye-bye.
Thanks.